There's a challenge on John Laird's page that I feel will be very beneficial to help atheists answer. Let's take a brief look at what it says. Challenge to all atheists on my page. Number 1, DNA is not merely a molecule with a pattern. It is a code, a language, and an information storage mechanism. Number 2, all codes are created by a conscious mind. There is no natural process known to science that creates coded information. Number 3, therefore, DNA was designed by a mind. Number 4, therefore, intelligent design is real. If you can provide an empirical example of a code or language that occurs naturally, you've toppled my proof. All you need is one. Now let's dissect John Laird's challenge to all atheists. The first and most important reason why that argument fails is that the first premise is dependent upon an equivocation fallacy, as the entire argument is predicated and built on a misleading use of the terms DNA and code. Can DNA be said to be a code? Sure, it can be argued that, but it is also, without question, a molecule and a nucleic acid. If we visit Wikipedia, we can confirm that. It says deoxyribonucleic acid is a nucleic acid that contains the genetic instructions used in the development and functioning of all known living organisms and some viruses. The main role of DNA molecules is the long-term storage of information. DNA is often compared to a set of blueprints or a recipe or a code, since it contains the instructions needed to construct other components of cells such as proteins and RNA molecules. Now again, you'll see by Wikipedia that they're saying, can it be compared to a code? That article you gave me does say that without question DNA is a code. And sure, an argument can be made that it is a code. But here, with another credible source, it's saying it is not a code, it's a nucleic acid, and it can be compared to a code. So the entire argument fails because it's based on equivocating between DNA and a code. And then it goes from there and trying to claim that DNA is not really a nucleic acid, it's not really a molecule, it's a code, and a code can only be designed by a conscious mind. So the entire argument falls apart because it's based initially on a fallacy of equivocation. If we go here, we can kind of define further what a nucleic acid is and see if a nucleic acid, which is what DNA is, has anything to do with a code. And we see here it says a nucleic acid is a macromolecule composed of chains of monomeric nucleotides. Now, again, nowhere do we see in this definition a code. It says nucleic acid, then it defines it further as a macromolecule composed of chains of monomeric nucleotides. So again, the argument totally fails with the very first premise because it's predicated on the fallacy of equivocation. And now we can move on to premise 2, and I'll read it again because it might be hard to see. Premise 2 says, all codes are created by a conscious mind. There is no natural process known to science that creates coded information. And if we concentrate on the word code, we can again see why the entire argument falls apart, because it's predicated on the fallacy of equivocation as it tries to equivocate between DNA and code. If you play by the argument's rules, then it will have some logical coherence, but you don't have to play by the argument's rules of treating DNA as a code, because DNA is without question a nucleic acid / macromolecule, and neither nucleic acid / macromolecules need a conscious mind in order to be created. They occur naturally. And once that is identified, the entire argument gives way to the fallacy of a non sequitur, because its premises do not logically follow anymore if you do not play by the argument's rules, which are not necessary to adhere to. Finally, we conclude by taking a look at premise 3, the conclusion number 4, and an addendum to the argument. Premise 3 says, therefore, DNA was designed by a mind. This is a fallacy of a non sequitur because it does not follow from the prior premises, which have already been identified, especially number 1, as being built upon the fallacy of equivocation. Premise 3 will only work if you play by their rules of considering DNA to be a code, and then therefore you say that DNA was designed by a mind. But since DNA is not just a code, or can only be said to be a code, but also is a nucleic acid / macromolecule, then premise 3 doesn't work at all, because nucleic acid / macromolecules do not require designing by a mind. And you do not have to play by the argument's rules, because the argument itself from the very first premise has already been identified as a fallacy and is therefore invalid. The whole argument only works if you play by their rules of treating DNA as a code. In fact, this argument really comes close to being the fallacy. It really is a fallacy of bifurcation, or in other words, a false dilemma, where they present you with a dilemma in considering DNA a code, and well, now you need to have a mind to design it, because a code can only come from a mind. But that dilemma is false, because it only works if you take their position that DNA is a code. You don't have to take that position, because DNA, while it can be said to be a code, is also a nucleic acid which occurs naturally. And now we move on to premise 4, which is the conclusion that says therefore intelligent design is real. This obviously fails because it's a non sequitur. It's not supported by the prior premises, therefore it has no valid claim to truth. And then there's an addendum that says if you can provide an empirical example of a code or language that occurs naturally, you top up my proof. All you need is one. Well, atheists do not have an onus to provide an empirical example of a code or language that occurs naturally, because DNA, while it can be said to be a code, is also without question again a nucleic acid which occurs naturally and does not require designing by mind. Again, the argument only works if you play by their rules and really their dilemma of considering DNA a code. But since the argument is predicated and built upon a fallacy of equivocation, one does not need to play by their rules or adhere to their false dilemma.